Hi, welcome to We're Talking About Practice, powered by Coach Base. I'm excited for this episode to have Ron Yeung, Youth Director of Canada Basketball, and talk about their long-term athlete development program. As you know, in the last couple of years, Canada produced a lot of NBA players, and a large part of that is because they have a great program. And Coach Yeung is going to share some of his favorite drills that he gives to his players and how you can change a drill in different ways, the same drill in different ways, to train different things. Really, really cool stuff. So check it out and tune in. And if you like the channel, subscribe. Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess I'll start with my current title. I'm the Manager of Domestic Development with Canada Basketball. I sort of been involved with the sport of basketball professionally, working in the administration level for the past 15 years. My sort of career path started from working with the Toronto Raptors, and working within the basketball development area of the basketball club, to now working with Canada Basketball, our Canadian national team program. So, altogether sort of been involved a lot through the ranks of working with amateur athletes, development aspect, working sort of, to see the growth of the game, as well as sort of how athletes develop along the pathway. My day-to-day task right now, it's a pretty wide scope from domestic development standpoint. My goal really is to, I guess, the first and foremost is to see the growth of the game of basketball in Canada. So from participation standpoint, that's obviously the number one objective from our standpoint. Number two is sort of ensure that there's success in terms of the growth of athletes, ensuring that they are getting the right teaching, they're getting the right training modules to allow them to succeed from a grassroots level all the way to junior and cadet national team level. So those two prongs are really sort of the basis of what my role is within Canada Basketball. It's pretty exciting. I mean, if you look at sort of the rise in popularity within the sport of basketball, a lot of it comes down to, okay, we are having all these great athletes in Canada that are now playing at the top level, the NBA. I like to probably contribute a big part of that to sort of when the Raptors first came into existence in Toronto and in representing Canada as a whole. I think that sort of brought basketball to sort of the stage where kids are now seeing them more often. Before, back in the late 90s, I think a lot of times you see hockey being the more prominent sport, and then followed by a lot of maybe soccer and baseball, but you don't see a lot of basketball back in the days. But when the Raptors first came into the stage, now you're seeing, basketball on TV every few days, and that's allowed the kids to sort of get excited and interested with the sport of basketball, and that's when you see our participation grow around, start to hike around that time. And I think that's a big contribution to how some of these guys like the Tristan Thompson, the Anthony Bennett, the Corey Josephs grew up through that generation, and then to lead them to where they are today. The excitement of all of that, along with sort of the pool, and then having good players playing against good players at that time, and then and then slowly, maturely, when Canada Basketball start seeing the rise of that and generating all these new programs. When we talk about Canada Basketball, we were, when we brought in the junior program, the cadet program, and then even from there, we started building in more intense programs like the junior academies and talent IV athletes strategy. So all those type of programs really start to now shape basketball as a as number one, number two sports in Canada, almost at a point where we are catching up to hockey. Well, you know what? I mean, definitely from a base standpoint, yes, the participation plays a big part. When you compare population of the U.S. versus Canada, we're talking about 300 million people in the U.S. versus 30 million in Canada. So we are 1/10 of their population. So in terms of what they are able to do to generate the athletes, a lot of it it's just they are able to pick out the cream of the crop out of a much bigger base. But I think that aside, the sort of what Canada has done in terms of grooming our players, the new philosophy in which we are using to develop our players certainly plays a big role in terms of our players' development. One of the big things that we started following is what we call the long-term athlete development model here in Canada, which is a sports science study that is put together by Sport Canada after best practices from a lot of different countries and federations to come up with sort of what we call an athlete-driven approach. I think the old school way of basketball is a lot of where coaches are telling the athletes what to do. Coaches are telling the athletes, here's what you got to do. Go and perform 100 layups and do it until you do it right. Well, now we are looking at that and saying, well, you know what? There's probably better ways of developing our athletes. I think when we talk about developing athletes, you have to look at making it at the very base level, making it fun for them. An athlete needs to learn how to move first before you start acquiring the skills for basketball. I think, I'm kind of jumping a lot of different places because there's so many different areas that I can touch on. But, having an athlete to develop the basic movement skills, learning how to make decisions as opposed to being robotic and rigid in the approach. And then, a lot of the times we talk about empowerment is another part, building the confidence of an athlete. Those are things that we start to do as a nation through one leading from by example through the Federation at Canada Basketball, but then educating our coaches to ensure that all the coaches within our entire country are doing what this Canadian philosophy is. I think the best way of looking at it is just understanding certain philosophies, and I think having a coach, most important aspect for them is for them to understand why they do what they do. A lot of times, you'll see coaches that are jumping into the sport for the first time and they aren't too familiar in terms of what to do. So what's the first thing you do? You go Google search basketball drills and you come up with a list of drills, you pick out a few, and then you just put them into practice during that night or something like that, without really understanding what is it that they're doing, without really understanding what progression you're trying to make, without really even understanding is it even fun for the athletes to do them, and if they're stage appropriate. I think those are really sort of the key points for a coach to understand in terms of, hey, you know what? First and foremost, at the very grassroots level, let's make it fun first. Let's make sure that the practice is fun and that it's not just repetition and drills after drills after drills. It's got to have some element of fun into it, that the kids are actually going to enjoy it. Because first and foremost, you want to make sure that you are making sure that they're having fun and enjoying the sport. Then from there, it really comes down to, okay, now let's talk about progression. Let's talk about an athlete's development, and how you build an athlete. I always say this, when we work with young athletes, before I even built a basketball player, I built an athlete first. And I think that's a really important aspect of the development circle, is that you have to make sure that they have developed all the movement skills before they can actually even try to start getting too specialized into basketball, the sport of basketball itself. And then a lot of that is a big part of what we talk about in specialization here in Canada basketball. That kids should not be specializing into one sport at an early stage. So allow the kids to try different things, work on the movement skills, and make sure that they learn how to move, run, and jump and kick and throw and catch and all of those different principles early, so that as they kind of progress through the biological age, they will now be able to be more confident to do all those things. After that, really, as you get into more of the basketball stuff, it's understanding, comprehending in terms of what it is that you're doing, being able to analyze and evaluate, and making sure that an athlete is their needs are fulfilled first before the coach's egos comes into play around all that. At the end of the day, we're really trying to develop global players, smart players, and making sure that players have all the required skills to allow them to achieve the next level. You're putting me on the spot, huh? Are we talking about like give me an age group, like a 6-year-old, 7-year-old? Are you talking about a little bit older? I'll preface this by saying like a lot of this stuff we do have it online on the Canada Basketball website. So if coaches are interested, there we definitely have a lot of drills and stuff like that that we put online. We have a new program called a Game Plan, which is sort of a coaches online portal, which basically we have built in the past year, I would say that now it funnels coaches into that portal, and it basically gives them access to videos, drills library, and basically a pathway for coaches in terms of what they should be doing at different age groups. So that's something that we're doing in Canada Basketball. But in terms of drills, I'll give an example at a young age level. I'll start with usually when I start a practice up, I'll start a practice what we call an animal walk, and essentially is through our coaches always warm up their athletes. I think that's a must. But what coaches a lot of times will just do is make the players run up and down the court and do some high knees and butt kicks. And which it's good in terms of training an athlete, but I would challenge that for a 6, 7-year-old. It's not exactly fun, and I think the first reaction you get from a young athlete is that a 6-year-old is that they'll be like, "Oh man, I don't want to do this. Can we just play basketball now?" What we do is what I would do is I would get them to line up, and then I would basically kind of get them to start thinking about a certain animal and how they move. Go down the court and jump like a kangaroo. Crawl down the court like you are a crab. So allowing them to move differently and try different things is one aspect of developing the movement skills. Along with that, when able to sort of capture the imagination of a child and they're thinking in terms of what that animal actually looks like, walk like, move like, then all of a sudden you're combining that imagination with a specific skill, and you're allowing them to explore that through their own imagination, and they're having fun doing that. You see a lot of smiles on the court when kids are doing that because they're actually kind of looking at other kids, and other kids are making fun of another kid. So you'll end up having a more of a fun environment doing that as opposed to just making a kid run up and down a court. So that's sort of a way in terms of hey, let's make it fun. So what we do a lot of times is we actually end up consulting a lot of phys ed teachers. They're not particularly specific basketball coaches, but they're so great with kids and they've gone through all the trainings and learning in terms of our early childhood education that it actually allows them to, they're able to come up with games that are, fun, exciting for kids, and kids actually, get enjoyment out of it. And then what we would do is I would actually take versions of those games and either, leave it as is because they are great icebreaker games, or we actually combine different elements of basketball into it to make it a little bit more basketball specific. Well, let's take it up a little bit older age group to maybe a 10, 11 age group. We would let's just take a shooting game for example. A lot of times, coaches will come in and we will want to work on an athlete's jump shot. So what will happen is they'll basically, okay, well, everybody goes to a basket and work on your shot and make, I don't know, 20 shots, for example, and and athletes will go through the repetition. Well, that's again, that's one way of doing it. What we do is we try to make it fun, incorporate an element of a challenge into it. So what we would do is probably start with two teams at two different ends of the basket. I would put a bucket or a hula hoop with some bean bags in the middle, and what they would do is every time they make a basket, they're able to come to the middle, retrieve the beanbag and bring it back to their home or their station. At the end of the game, whoever has the most beanbags would actually win the game as the first round. So what we're able to do here is to, I guess, add an element of a challenge to it. where it's a bit of a competition now, where two teams are competing against each other. They're now getting excited over, okay, we gotta get the beanbag, we gotta make the basket. So the kids are actually getting hyped up over the game itself. What we would do is then we would have loading phases, and by loading I mean we would add different challenges in different rounds. So in the second round, what we would do is we would say, okay, so Team A would have 8 beanbags and Team B would have 6 beanbags. Now, the next round, what we're going to do is we're allowed to steal from each other. So what it means is you let one athlete, so the two teams are going again. They'll start shooting. If they get a basket, they're able to run to the other team's home and steal one of the beanbag and put it back into theirs. So again, this creates a little bit more excitement. But what you'll find is you'll see kids running across the court, at full speed. And what it's really teaching is that kids are now learning how to have court awareness and making sure they're keeping their head up so that they don't run into each other. I think that's another element to start adding in. Then on the third piece, we incorporate two basketball, and what will happen is you're now able to, once you score the basket, you'll dribble the basketball to the opponent's home and take the beanbag from them. So in the third round, what we've done is you're now creating a dribbling series into it, adding an element of dribbling, combining with, court awareness, head up, all of those pieces. This loading phase that allows an athlete to start adding skills within one simple game is what we try to do to help coaches understand, hey, you know what, we can progress an athlete's skills. I can take one game and load 15 different ways and add different elements along the way. So that simple game alone. Round 3, we add some dribbling. Round 4, you can add some pylons and have them zigzag before they can go to another team to steal the beanbag. All of those different things you can start adding into a simple drill, and kids can actually get really excited over a whole series like that. I think when you talk about movements, you got your fundamental basic movements, your run, jump, throw, kick, catch, strike. Those are your basic fundamental movements. And then as you get into and then athlete progression, now you start adding in the ABCs of movement, which is your agility, balance, coordination, and speed. Those are sort of what we call the fundamental basics, the fundamental movement skills that a kid needs to acquire during their window of trainability, usually between the ages of, I would say, 4 to 7, 4 to 8 years old, in order to allow them to build that confidence to succeed. Those are all things that needs to be incorporated into any programming. And I think that's a big part. What you see a lot of times with basketball programs is that coaches get so excited, they jump into the gym, and they just start getting kids playing basketball. But what happens is, well, the kids haven't really learned the basic movement skills yet. So you see, the kids are not, ready for that. And, and what happens is, that's fine and all, they'll dabble in the sport, but they'll get to a certain point where they'll either plateau or they haven't, they get overuse injuries or they'll kind of just burn out. I'm actually sort of a perfect example of that. When I was younger, I never really did have a chance to develop the movement skills because, a big part of my childhood was just on academics. It's a big part of my childhood was just on, just doing a lot of school stuff, but I never really got into sports until later. So I was a bit of a late bloomer. But, as I get into sports, around 10, 11 years old, I've already noticed I'm definitely not fast. I'm definitely not as agile. I definitely don't jump very high like some of the other kids around my age. And that's because I never had a chance to develop those movement skills at an early age. And that's a big part. And that's a big part of what we preach here in Canada is that, hey, you know what? Let's develop these guys. Let's develop these participants and athletes to make sure that they are athletes first and then have them develop those basic skills and then move from there to develop the sports skills. That will give them a total package in terms of what an athlete should do. In terms of how do you do it, I mean, there's that's that's an old wide open window because there's just so many different windows, so many different drills, or so many different ways of doing so. I'll just take throwing. I just take throwing, right? I think what we also coaches misunderstood is that, well, if I don't need to throw or kick in a sport of basketball, do I need to learn those movement skills? The answer is absolutely yes. I think kids need to have those skills. Even within our Canada basketball programming for basketball, with our Steve Nash Youth Basketball program, we try to incorporate drills that plays different sports as well. So I keep touching on the fact that every athlete should build different movement skills through playing multi-sports. And I think that's a very, very big message for young coaches is not just focus and specialize on one sport and allow kids to try different sports as much as possible. So sorry, guys, I kind of went up to a different tangent, but to give you an example, so throwing. At an early age, when you looking at an athlete, probably a young child, maybe around 4 years old, they throw very rigid. They're very little body movements. They are, standing very stagnant, with very little foot placement, and they are just basically have their arms close to the body and just, tossing, a beanbag of ball. And what will most likely happen is they'll throw it straight to the ground. So you look at an athlete like that, and you basically just have them focus on, hey, let's, just work on, throwing into a bucket. And just have them work on developing that focus, work on developing that coordination skills. Then from there, as they progress a little bit older, now you can add something a little bit more challenging. For example, you can now have them work with a partner and basically, just work on using a bigger size ball, maybe a Nerf ball, or something that it's easy for them to sort of go back and forth with, to just work on that skills and have them to learn that basic skills of throwing and receiving at the same time. Again, it's work on that coordination and all of that. And then as they progress, now you're working with an athlete with a tennis ball, something like that, which is a little bit smaller. Now they have to really focus on identifying the target, having that hand-eye coordination, absorbing the force of the catch. All of those things are what we use to in terms of helping an athlete to develop movement skills. And it's a progression. We don't try to make a 4 or 5 year old athlete try to throw like a Toronto Blue Jays player in a Major League Baseball. They're not trying to do the whole wind up with the leg up and trying to pitch a 90 miles an hour fastball, anything like that. It's really understanding where your athlete's stage is and ensuring that they are learning age and stage appropriately so that they can get the most success out of it. Yep. Well, I mean, you know what? I use Steve Nash in a lot of my examples because Steve essentially is the multi-sport athlete when he was younger. He didn't really dabble or specialize into the game of basketball until he was at least 12, 13 years old. And before that, he was an avid soccer player. He is really big into soccer, so you can see a lot of that transfer into basketball because when you see him play on the court, his footwork is just amazing. Different skills you learn from different sports allow you to transfer those skills and get better at it. And so, I think that's a very important message that kids at a young age should try as many sports as possible. Don't specialize in one sport. Make sure that you just dabble on different things. And just try to learn it, get enjoyment out of it. And you eventually once you get into sort of the junior high and high school, you'll start to narrow it down a little bit because you'll have a field that you're very good at, and that's when you start specializing a little bit more, narrow down to maybe two sports, and then maybe eventually down to high school, you get down to one sport from there. But at the elementary age, my biggest recommendation is just let them play, let them have fun, and try as many sports as possible. I'll kind of speak to decision making first, and I think that that's something that from a philosophy standpoint is something that we at Canada Basketball is really really big on, and that's something that sort of stemmed from when you watch European players in the NBA. You look at a Dirk Nowitzki, look at a Manny Ginobili, Tony Parker, all these players. a lot of times you look at some of these European players and you're kind of surprised. Well, they don't have the best of athletic ability, but they're able to do so well in a game of basketball. And a lot of times is, you look at what they're doing at the European countries, you realize that the biggest difference is that all the players are smart players. All the players are great on making decisions. And I think that's something that, you see the biggest difference is that in North America, and I think it's slowly changing now. But back before, a lot of times you go to a basketball camp and all you see is just repetitive drills over and over and over again. You see an athlete performing, a Mikan series. You see an athlete doing, 100 layups left and 100 layups right, but they are essentially just becoming robotic. In a game situation, coaches will have an athlete. Okay, here's what you're supposed to do. You pop up to the elbow extend, you curl around your screen, and you're gonna catch and you're gonna shoot. And that's all they know because that's the one play that the coach designed for them, and they become very robotic in terms of their